On Valentine's Day in 2013, I received a notification on my cell phone saying that Oscar Pistorius shot and killed his girlfriend, and I was extremely shocked. I definitely did not expect to see his name associated with a killing. I was a fan of Oscar's. I followed him through the 2012 London Olympics. I rooted for him. I watched all of his interviews, and I really thought he was an inspiration. I felt like, he was the kind of person that for anybody who was struggling with anything, whether it be a physical disability or any other challenge in their life, that they could look up to him and learn something from him. That was certainly the perception I was left with in watching him and listening to him and reading the things that had been written about him here in America. He certainly didn't fit the mold of a killer. But then again, most people don't. Following true crime all of these years, I certainly recognize that oftentimes we are blindsided by the things that people do, which is actually an interesting thing to think about because, murders happen every single day, and yet we seem so shocked when somebody commits murder, certainly when it's somebody that we don't expect to do it, and we're left blindsided. And so it made me, ask the question, why? Why was I blindsided in this case, and why are we continually, collectively, blindsided by these cases as well? So I was hopeful that we were going to find out that what Oscar was saying was true, that it was a case of mistaken identity, that, essentially that he believed that it was an intruder and he killed that person by accident. That's what I hoped for. Certainly, we don't live our lives hoping that somebody killed somebody else intentionally. And, so I went into this case hoping for that. I think where it really started to change for me was when I heard about the door. When I found out that it was 4 shots through a door and not one, that really made me stop and think that there was going to be something else here that maybe we didn't want to hear. And then the photos of the crime scene were leaked. And I just got that feeling that we were about to hear some pretty dark things that had probably been hidden, and had likely been hidden for a long time. But with that said, when the case started, when the trial started in 2014, March of 2014, I was very objective going into it, and I am with any case, regardless of how open and shut I think something may be, regardless of how I feel about somebody's potential guilt. I really make sure that when I start listening to what's being presented, that I am as objective as possible. And there's a reason for that. That's because twice in my life I've been a juror. What that means is that twice in my life I have had somebody else's future in my hands, and that's not something that you can take lightly. The first time I was a juror is when I lived in Boston many years ago. That was a assault case that I sat on. The second case was here in California in 2012. I was selected to be on an attempted murder trial. And it was definitely a unique case in that the defendant, who at the time was in his 40s, was accused of attempting to murder his mother. He was also accused of attempting to assault his young teenage son. As you can imagine, with a dynamic like that, it was a very emotional case, and it was a complicated case because the families were the one and the same. The family of the victim was the same as the family of the defendant. I'm sure you can all remember the Casey Anthony case, and it was the same situation there, and it certainly was complicated and emotional, and so we dealt with some of those same complexities in the case that I sat on. When I reflect on the case now from 3 years ago, the one that I was a juror on, I realize that there are some similarities with the Oscar Pistorius trial. The biggest one being that the defendant in our case had severe issues with his legs, not from any type of birth defect, but actually from an accident that he was in several years ago. And he had multiple surgeries on his legs. And at times while he was recovering, for a few months at a time, he would be really laid up and depending on other people to take care of him, which, for a grown man is difficult. And you could see where his inability to, function as a fully able-bodied person at times in his life really affected his personality and his moods. I mean, he definitely had, from the evidence that we were given at trial, you could really see that he had a temper and that he did have it in him to behave in ways that were well beyond what would be appropriate. There were many doctors that came and testified on his behalf and talked about all sorts of things from painkiller use to, his physical condition. Really what I took away from their testimony was that they were trying to essentially explain away his poor behavior. And we certainly saw that in the Oscar trial with many witnesses trying to not so much explain, I felt, not so much explain Oscar's situation, but it felt more like an excuse, for his behavior at times. But in our case, I felt like there actually wasn't enough evidence to support that he did intentionally try to kill his mother. So the majority of that case, and it lasted for about 3 weeks, I was thinking that it would likely be a not guilty verdict. But that all changed when the defendant testified. Now, in Oscar's case, he testified as well, but he had to. He really had no choice. When you're in a situation that you are claiming self-defense of some type, you really do need to get up there and explain your situation when it was just you and one other person, and that other person is now dead. In our case, the defendant did not need to take the stand. I actually think it was a critical error by the defense team to put him on the stand because many of the things that he testified to were in contradiction to other things. And it really, for me, it really started to prove what the prosecution was saying. Thinking to myself, how in the world can I find this man guilty? How can I put this person in jail for the rest of their lives and take their life away from them? It was extremely difficult for me to think about the fact that I was in a position to do that. And so when I think about Oscar's case, and certainly myself and many other people believe that Judge Masipa did make some critical errors in her verdict. You have to wonder why. Why did that happen? I mean, she is an experienced judge. How could that possibly happen? Did she do it intentionally or was it a mistake? And it just has made me wonder if, maybe she felt some of the same things that I felt in that moment. I know that seems very unlikely. I'm a layperson. She's a judge. I mean, certainly it makes more sense for a layperson to get caught up in something like that. But could a judge? We have to remember that she's a human being too. So certainly it's possible. Maybe she observed Oscar on the stand all of those months and felt some type of sympathy for him. In our case, when we went to deliberate, we were split almost down the middle. It was 7-5 in favor of guilt, and I was selected to be the jury foreperson, which was quite an incredible experience. I don't think I'd want to do it again. I would certainly want to be on a jury again, but I don't know if I'd want the responsibility of being a foreperson again. But we spent 3.5 days deliberating over this case, and we did finally come to a consensus that we all felt very comfortable with. And that's an interesting process. A lot of people think that when you're divided and then somehow come together, that people have been coerced or convinced or, some funny business happened in that room. And that's really not true at all. You think about any important decision that you make in your life, and oftentimes you make it through discussion, with other people. And that's what happens in deliberations. I will never forget that day that the judge delivered our guilty verdict. It was a very emotional day, and Here in the United States, guilt is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what it's based on. It's not no doubt whatsoever. It's not, 100%, no question whatsoever. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. So what does that mean? Well, basically what that means is, most jurors get to a place where they're about 99% sure and have to make a decision. And I'll tell you, it's not the 99% that keeps you up at night. It's that 1% that does. And that's a tough thing to live with.